The scream tore through the rain-soaked alley like a knife through flesh. Marcus Thompson hadn't eaten in 2 days. His cardboard box was all he had left in this world. But when he heard that desperate cry for help, something inside him refused to stay silent. He rounded the corner and saw 3 masked men dragging a teenage girl toward a black SUV. She was begging, crying, terrified. One of them slapped her hard across the face. And that's when Marcus made a choice that would save her life, a choice that would destroy his. Because 24 hours later, this homeless hero would be sitting in handcuffs, accused by the billionaire father of the very girl he saved. This is a story about dignity, injustice, and the shocking truth that power can't hide forever. The scream cut through the rain like a blade, sharp, desperate. The kind of sound that makes your blood freeze and your heart stop. The kind of sound that tells you someone is in trouble, real trouble, the kind you can't ignore. Marcus Thompson heard it from his cardboard shelter behind the Italian restaurant on 5th Avenue. He'd been lying there in the dark, trying to forget the cold, trying to forget the hunger that had been gnawing at his stomach for 2 days straight. The smell of garlic and fresh bread from the restaurant's kitchen vents used to torture him. Now he barely noticed. That's what happens when you've been homeless for 15 months. You learn to turn off parts of yourself just to survive. You learn to ignore the warmth you can't have, the food you can't afford, the life you used to live. But that scream, he couldn't ignore that scream. His body moved before his mind could catch up, before the voice in his head could remind him to stay down, stay hidden, stay out of trouble, before the part of him that had learned to survive on these streets could tell him that getting involved was dangerous, that heroes don't last long when you're homeless, that nobody cares what happens to people like him. But Marcus wasn't thinking about any of that. His legs were already moving, his hands were already clenched into fists. Something ancient and primal had woken up inside his chest, something that homelessness hadn't stolen, something that poverty and pain and loss couldn't kill. He rounded the corner into the alley and the scene hit him like a punch to the gut. 3 men, all wearing ski masks, all dressed in black, professional, organized, dangerous. Behind them, a black SUV sat idling, exhaust rising into the rain like smoke from a dragon's mouth. The back door was open, waiting, and between the 3 men, struggling, crying, terrified, was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 16, maybe 17. Long, dark hair plastered to her face by the rain. Expensive designer coat, the kind Marcus recognized from the store windows he passed every day. The kind that cost more than he used to make in a month. She was rich, that much was obvious. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, she was just a kid, a scared kid who needed help. "Please," she gasped, her voice breaking. "Please, my father, he'll pay whatever you want. Just don't hurt me, please." The kidnapper closest to her, the biggest one, didn't say a word. He just pulled his hand back and slapped her hard across the face. The sound echoed in the alley like a gunshot. The girl's head snapped to the side. A cry escaped her lips, and Marcus felt something explode inside his chest. Rage, pure, burning, righteous. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about who she was or where she came from. It was about what he was seeing. A child being hurt, a human being in pain. And 3 cowards who thought their masks and their muscles gave them the right to terrorize someone weaker. Marcus had been a lot of things in his life. A soldier, a husband, a father, a man with a home and a job and a future. He'd lost all of that. The war had taken pieces of his soul. The divorce had taken everything else. The PTSD had done the rest. Now he was just a homeless man living behind a restaurant, invisible to the world that walked past him every single day. But standing there in that alley, watching that girl's terror, Marcus remembered something he'd forgotten. He remembered his dignity. Let her go. His voice was quiet, calm, steady as a heartbeat. It cut through the rain and the girl's sobbing and the rumble of the SUV's engine. The 3 men turned, slowly, like they couldn't believe what they were hearing. They saw him standing there, torn jacket hanging off his shoulders, dirt-stained hands, graying beard, hollow cheeks, the uniform of the streets, the invisible man made visible, and they laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh, it was genuine, like they'd just heard the funniest joke of their lives. The biggest one, the one who'd slapped the girl, took a step toward Marcus, his shoulders shaking with amusement. "Get lost, old man," he said, his voice muffled by the ski mask. "This doesn't concern you. Walk away while you still can—" Marcus didn't move, didn't blink. He just stood there in the rain, water running down his face. His eyes locked on the man's eyes through the holes in the mask. "I said let her go." His voice was quieter this time. Colder. The kind of cold that comes from a place deeper than words. The kind of cold that comes from a man who's already lost everything and has nothing left to fear. The laughter stopped. The big kidnapper's posture changed. His shoulders tensed. His hands curled into fists. "You got a death wish, old man?" Marcus took a step forward. "Just one. But it was enough. Last chance," he said. "Walk away. Leave the girl. Nobody has to get hurt." The kidnapper lunged. What happened next was fast. So fast the girl barely saw it. So fast the other two kidnappers didn't have time to react. 15 years ago, Marcus Thompson had been a Marine. Captain Marcus Thompson. 2 tours in Afghanistan. Hand-to-hand combat instructor. Purple Heart recipient. He'd trained hundreds of young soldiers how to fight, how to survive, how to win. Those instincts don't die. They don't fade. They just sleep. Waiting. And now they woke up. Marcus sidestepped the lunge like water flowing around a rock. His hand shot out, grabbed the kidnapper's wrist, twisted. The man screamed. Marcus drove his elbow into the man's face. Once. Twice. The kidnapper dropped like a bag of cement. The second kidnapper rushed him from the side. Marcus spun, ducked under a wild punch, drove his fist into the man's solar plexus. The air rushed out of him in a painful whoosh. Marcus swept his legs. The man hit the pavement hard, his head bouncing off the concrete with a sickening crack. The third kidnapper froze. Zeh. His eyes went wide behind the ski mask. He looked at his 2 partners on the ground, groaning, bleeding, broken. He looked at Marcus, standing there in the rain, breathing hard but steady, his fists still clenched, and he ran. He turned and sprinted toward the SUV, yanked the passenger door open, dove inside. The engine roared, tires screeched, the vehicle peeled out of the alley, leaving the 2 unconscious kidnappers behind like trash. Silence fell, except for the rain, and the girl's breathing. Marcus stood there for a moment, his chest heaving, adrenaline still pumping through his veins. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the release, from the memory of who he used to be flooding back all at once. Then he turned to look at the girl. She was staring at him, rain streaming down her face, eyes wide with shock and disbelief and something else, something that looked like awe. "You." Her voice was barely a whisper. "You saved me." Marcus didn't say anything. He just looked at her for a long moment, saw the red mark on her cheek where she'd been struck, saw the tears mixing with the rain, saw the expensive coat and the designer shoes and the life of privilege she'd been born into. He nodded once. Then he turned to walk away, back to his cardboard box, back to his corner of the world, back to being invisible. "Wait!" Her voice stopped him. He paused but didn't turn around. "What's your name?" she called out. "Please, I need to know. You saved my life. What's your N?" "May?" Marcus stood there in the rain, the cold seeping into his bones, the hunger still gnawing at his stomach, the weight of 15 months on the streets pressing down on his shoulders. He thought about answering, thought about telling her, but what would be the point? She'd go back to her mansion, her billionaire father, her safe, comfortable life, and he'd go back to his cardboard shelter. 2 different worlds, 2 different realities. This moment would fade for her, become a story she'd tell at dinner parties. The time she was almost kidnapped, the homeless man who saved her. "Doesn't matter," he said quietly, and he walked away, back into the shadows, back into the rain, back into the invisible world where men like him lived and died without names. But he was wrong. It did matter, because that girl was Emma Whitmore, daughter of Richard Whitmore, one of the wealthiest men in the country. Billionaire real estate mogul, man of power and influence, man who controlled politicians and corporations with a phone call. And what happened in that alley, on that rainy night, was about to change everything. For Marcus, for Emma, for everyone. Because sometimes the smallest acts of courage create the biggest waves. Sometimes the most invisible people become impossible to ignore. And sometimes, when a homeless man saves a billionaire's daughter, the world pays attention, whether you were ready for it or not. Marcus didn't know it yet, but his life was about to be turned upside down. S name was about to be everywhere. His face was about to be on every screen in the city. And Richard Whitmore, the man with all the power, all the money, all the control, was about to learn a lesson he'd never forget. That dignity doesn't come from a bank account. That heroism doesn't wear expensive suits. And that sometimes the man you'd walk past without a second glance is worth more than everything you own. Marcus Thompson was about to be seen, really seen. for the first time in 15 months, and nothing would ever be the same again. 24 hours later, Marcus was in handcuffs. He sat in the interrogation room at the 5th Precinct, his wrists bound by cold steel, staring at the gray walls that had witnessed 1,000 confessions, 1,000 lies, 1,000 broken lives. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry wasps. The metal chair beneath him was bolted to the floor. Everything in this room was designed to make you feel small, powerless, guilty. Marcus had never been arrested before, not once in his 52 years, but sitting here now he wasn't surprised, not really, because he'd lived long enough to know how the world worked, how the system worked, how a black man, especially a homeless black man, was always one accusation away from being guilty, one suspicion away from being locked in a cage. He'd saved a girl's life less than 24 hours ago, fought off 3 armed kidnappers with his bare hands, put his own life on the line for a stranger. And now he was here, in handcuffs, being treated like a criminal. Welcome to America. Outside the interrogation room, in the hallway lined with wanted posters and department awards, Richard Whitmore stood like a king surveying his kingdom. He was 6'2", broad-shouldered, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people made in 6 months. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled. His shoes were Italian leather, polished to a mirror shine. His watch was a Patek Philippe, the kind you don't buy, you inherit. Everything about Richard Whitmore screamed power, money, control. Behind him stood his private security team, 4 men in black suits with earpieces and dead eyes, professional, loyal, expensive. Behind them, his lawyers, 3 of them, partners from the most prestigious firm in the city, the kind of lawyers who made problems disappear, the kind who knew judges by their first names. Richard Whitmore didn't go anywhere without his power on display. It was his armor, his weapon, his identity. Detective Maria Ramirez stood beside him, a folder tucked under her arm, her face tight with frustration. She was a 20-year veteran of the force, had seen every kind of case, every kind of criminal, every kind of victim, and she knew, deep in her gut, that something was wrong here. Very wrong. "That's him," Richard said, his voice cold as winter steel. He pointed through the one-way glass at Marcus sitting alone in the interrogation room. "That's the homeless man who was near my daughter during the kidnapping." Detective Ramirez turned to look at him. "Mr. Whitmore, with all due respect, your daughter has told us repeatedly that this man saved her life. She said he fought off 3 armed kidnappers. He's a hero, not a suspect." Richard's jaw tightened. His eyes, gray and hard as stone, didn't blink. "My daughter was traumatized, confused. She's 17 years old. She doesn't understand what she saw. She seemed pretty clear to me, sir. She gave us a detailed account. She said Marcus Thompson stepped in when no one else would. She said he risked his life for her." Richard turned to face the detective fully. When he spoke, his voice was ice, pure ice. "I want him investigated, thoroughly. I want to know everything about him, where he's been, who he associates with. How do we know he wasn't part of it? How do we know this wasn't a setup?" Detective Ramirez blinked. "A setup? Sir, he fought them off. He saved your daughter, or," Richard said slowly, deliberately, "he was part of the plan. Stage a kidnapping, have one member of the crew save the victim, earn trust, get access to my family, my home, my accounts." He paused, letting the words sink in. "These people, detective, they're desperate. They're capable of anything. These people," the words hung in the air like poison gas, invisible but lethal. Detective Ramirez felt them settle in her chest. She'd heard those words before. Heard them from wealthy men in expensive suits who looked at homeless people, at black people, at anyone different from them, and saw not human beings but threats, problems, animals. "Mr. Whitmore," she said carefully, "I don't think that's what happened here. I don't pay you to think, detective. I pay your department's budget with my taxes. Significant taxes. And I'm telling you what I want. I want this man investigated. I want to know if he had anything to do with my daughter's kidnapping. And until I'm satisfied, I want him held." Before Detective Ramirez could respond, the door at the end of the hallway burst open. Emma Whitmore rushed in, her face flushed, her eyes red from crying. She was still wearing the same clothes from the night before, the designer coat now wrinkled and stained. She looked younger than 17, vulnerable, desperate. "Dad, stop!" she shouted. Her voice echoed in the hallway. Officers at their desks looked up. "Dad, please, I told you Marcus saved my life." "He had nothing to do with the kidnapping. He fought them. He protected me. Why won't you listen to me?" Richard didn't even turn to look at his daughter. He kept his eyes on the one-way glass on Marcus sitting alone in that cold room. "Go home, Emma," he said quietly. "You're upset. You don't understand how the world works." "I understand perfectly." Emma's voice cracked. "You're trying to destroy the man who saved me because he's homeless. Because he's black. Because he doesn't fit into your perfect world." Now Richard turned. His face was hard, unreadable. "That's enough. Go home. Now, Dad, I said go home." His voice was sharp as a knife. "Final. We'll discuss this later. In private." Emma stared at her father, tears streaming down her face. She opened her mouth to say something else, then closed it. She looked through the glass at Marcus, at the man who'd risked everything for her, now sitting in handcuffs because of her father's paranoia and prejudice. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the hallway until the door closed behind her. Richard watched her go, his expression unchanged. Then he turned back to Detective Ramirez. "Do your job, Detective, or I'll find someone who will—" He walked away, his security team and lawyers following like a royal procession. The hallway felt colder after he left, emptier. Detective Ramirez stood there for a long moment, staring at the folder in her hands, Marcus Thompson's file. What little they'd been able to find on a homeless man who barely existed in the system anymore. She took a deep breath. Then she walked into the interrogation room. Marcus looked up when she entered. His face was calm, resigned. He'd been sitting there for 3 hours, and not once had he demanded a lawyer. Not once had he shouted or protested or claimed his innocence. He just sat there, waiting, like a man who'd already accepted his fate. Detective Ramirez sat down across from him. She put the folder on the table but didn't open it. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "I want you to know that I believe you. I believe you saved that girl. I believe you're a hero." Marcus didn't react, just kept his eyes on the table. "But," she continued, her voice heavy, "Richard Whitmore has lawyers, influence, money. He's pushing for charges, suspicious circumstances, potential accomplice. He's building a case that you were part of the kidnapping plot." Now Marcus looked up, met her eyes. His were tired, old, but not defeated. Never defeated. "Without evidence proving your innocence," Detective Ramirez said, "I can't protect you from this. He's going to bury you, and there's nothing I can do to stop him." Her silence filled the room. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere down the hall a phone rang. B.R. Marcus spoke for the first time in 3 hours. His voice was quiet, steady. "I don't need to prove anything, Detective. I know what I did. I know who I am. That's enough." B.R. Detective Ramirez shook her head. "That's not how the system works, Mr. Thompson. The system doesn't care what you know, it cares what you can prove." Marcus smiled. It was a sad smile, a knowing smile. The smile of a man who'd seen too much, lived too much, lost too much. "I know exactly how the system works, Detective," he said. "I've been living in it my whole life. Black man, poor man, homeless man. The system wasn't built for people like me. It was built to grind people like me into dust." The words hit Detective Ramirez like a punch, because she knew he was right. She'd seen it happen 1,000 times. Good people destroyed by bad circumstances. Innocent people convicted because they couldn't afford good lawyers. Black men locked away because the system assumed their guilt before they ever walked into a courtroom. "I'm sorry," she said. And she meant it. Marcus nodded. "I know you are, but sorry doesn't change anything, does it?" Bar Detective Ramirez stood up. She wanted to say something else, something comforting, something hopeful. But there were no words. So she just walked to the door, her hand on the handle, her heart heavy. "For what it's worth," she said without turning around, "thank you. For saving that girl. You're a better man than most people will ever know." She left the room, left Marcus alone with his handcuffs and his dignity and his truth that nobody wanted to hear. Outside, Richard Whitmore stood by the front entrance of the police station, his phone pressed to his ear. Rain was falling again, tapping against the glass doors like impatient fingers. "I don't care what it costs," he said into the phone. His voice was low, dangerous. "I want everything on him. Criminal record, associates, mental health history. And I want it used. I want charges filed. I want him to disappear." On the other end of the line, his head of security confirmed the order. Richard hung up, slipped his phone into his pocket, looked out at the rain. His plan was simple. Make this problem disappear. Make Marcus Thompson disappear. Bury him so deep that no one would ever find him. Use his power, his money, his influence to erase a man who dared to exist in his daughter's world. Richard Whitmore had built an empire on making problems disappear. He'd crushed competitors, silenced whistleblowers, paid off politicians. What was one homeless man compared to all that? Nothing. Less than nothing. But Richard Whitmore didn't know who he was dealing with. He didn't know about Marcus Thompson's past, about the med else in a pawn shop somewhere, about the lives saved in deserts halfway around the world, about the dignity that poverty couldn't kill and homelessness couldn't steal. He didn't know that Marcus Thompson wasn't just a homeless man. He was a Marine, a father, a survivor, a hero, and heroes don't disappear quietly. Not when the world is watching. Not when the truth demands to be heard. Richard Whitmore thought he had all the power, all the control. But he was about to learn a lesson that money can't teach and privilege can't buy. That dignity doesn't come from a bank account. That justice doesn't belong to the highest bidder. And that sometimes when you try to bury a man, you're actually planting a seed. A seed that's about to grow into something you can't control. Something that will change everything. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. Emma Whitmore did something her father never expected. Something he never thought his obedient, sheltered daughter would have the courage to do. She went back to the alley. It was late afternoon, 2 days after Marcus had been released from police custody. Released but not cleared. Released but not free. The charges were dropped for lack of evidence, but the damage was done. Richard Whitmore's lawyers had done their job. Marcus's name was in the system now. Flagged, marked, suspicious. And for a homeless man trying to survive on the streets, that was as good as a death sentence. Emma found him behind the Italian restaurant on 5th Avenue, in the same spot where he'd been living for 15 months. His cardboard shelter was half collapsed, soggy from the rain. His few belongings were scattered around him, a torn backpack, a blanket that had seen better days, a plastic bag with some clothes inside. Everything he owned in the world could fit in a shopping cart. He was packing, slowly, methodically, getting ready to leave. "Please," Emma said, her voice breaking the silence. "Don't go!" Marcus didn't look up. He kept folding his blanket, kept stuffing his things into the backpack. His hands moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd done this before, who'd packed up and moved on from place to place. Always one step ahead of trouble, always trying to disappear. "Your father's a powerful man," Marcus said quietly. "I know how this ends. He wants me gone, so I'm leaving." Simple as that. "It's not simple," Emma said, stepping closer. "You saved my life. You shouldn't have to run. You shouldn't have to hide. Should and shouldn't don't matter much on the streets, kid." Marcus finally looked up at her. His eyes were tired, resigned. "Your father made it clear. He doesn't want me around. He'll use his money, his lawyers, his connections to make my life hell until I disappear. So I'm saving us both the trouble. I'm disappearing." "But that's not fair!" Emma's voice rose, angry now, frustrated. "You did nothing wrong. You're a hero." Marcus smiled sadly. "The world doesn't care about fair, Emma, and heroes are just regular people who did something good once. Doesn't mean the world owes them anything." Emma stood there, tears building in her eyes. She'd spent the last 2 days fighting with her father, screaming at him, begging him to drop the accusations, to thank Marcus, to do the right thing. But Richard Whitmore was a wall, unmovable, unshakable. Convinced that he was protecting his family from a threat only he could see. "Then let me tell you something he doesn't know," Emma said. Her voice was steady now, determined. She pulled out her phone, a new phone, one her father didn't know about, one she'd bought with her own money at a store 3 blocks from her school. She tapped the screen, pulled up a video, turned the phone toward Marcus. "I recorded the whole thing," she said. "The kidnapping, you fighting them, everything. I have proof." The video played. Shaky footage, dark, grainy, but clear enough. You could see the 3 men in ski masks. You could see Emma struggling. You could see the slap. And then you could see Marcus, stepping out of the shadows, stepping in when no one else would, fighting, protecting, saving. Marcus stared at the screen. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of something. Hope, maybe, or just surprise. "Then show the police," he said. "I tried." Emma's voice cracked. "I tried to show them the day after it happened. But my father blocked it. He took my phone. Erased the video, or he thought he did. He told me to stop being hysterical, told me I was confused, traumatized. He said I didn't understand what really happened." She paused. wiped tears from her cheeks. He doesn't want the truth, he wants control, he wants to believe what makes sense to him, what fits his view of the world. And in his world, homeless black men are threats, not heroes, not people, just threats. Marcus closed his eyes. He'd heard those words before, lived those words, felt them every single day on the streets, the looks, the assumptions, the fear in people's eyes when they saw him. Like he was something dangerous just by existing. He called you a criminal, Emma continued, her voice shaking with anger now. He said you were probably in on it. Said people like you are... She couldn't finish the sentence. The words were too ugly, too painful, but Marcus knew what our father had said. He'd heard variations of it his entire life. These people, those people, people like you, words designed to separate, to dehumanize, to make it easier to hurt someone when you don't see them as fully human. Emma took a deep breath. But I backed up the video. Before he took my phone. I sent it to my email, downloaded it again, and an hour ago I posted it online. Marcus's eyes snapped open. You what? I posted it on every social media platform I could find. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. I used the hashtag #HomelessHeroMarcus. I told the truth. I showed the world what really happened. Showed him her phone again. The video had been up for less than 2 hours, but it was already spreading like wildfire. Shared, retweeted, reposted. The numbers climbed as they watched. 10,000 views, 50,000, 100,000. The comment section was exploding. People were angry, outraged, demanding justice. Papa T is going viral, Emma said. People are seeing the truth. They're seeing what you did. They're seeing what my father tried to hide. Ma, Cuss stared at the screen. His hands were shaking now, not from fear, from something else, something he hadn't felt in a long time. BR5A, Idation Bad Bye. Morning the video had 15 million views. 15 million people had watched Marcus Thompson save a young girl's life. 15 million people had seen him risk everything for a stranger. 15 million people had witnessed an act of pure, selfless courage. And they were angry. News vans surrounded Richard Whitmore's estate by sunrise. Reporters lined the street, cameras rolling, microphones ready. They shouted questions at the gates, at the security guards, at anyone who came in or out. Mr. Whitmore, did you falsely accuse the man who saved your daughter? Mr. Whitmore, do you have a comment on the allegations of racial bias? Mr. Whitmore, why did you try to hide the truth? Inside the mansion, Richard Whitmore stood at his office window, looking out at the circus below. His jaw was clenched, his hands were fists, his perfectly ordered world was falling apart, piece by piece, and he didn't know how to stop it. His phone rang, his publicist, his lawyers, his board members, everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted damage control. Everyone wanted him to fix this before it destroyed his reputation, his business, his legacy. But there was more. Something he didn't know yet. Something that was about to make everything worse. A journalist named Sarah Chen, an investigative reporter for the city's largest newspaper, had done what Richard Whitmore never bothered to do. She'd dug into Marcus Thompson's past. She'd found military records, service records, commendations. The truth that was always there, waiting to be discovered by anyone who cared enough to look. Marcus Thompson, former Marine captain, 2 tours in Afghanistan, led a platoon of 32 soldiers, brought them all home alive, earned a Purple Heart after taking shrapnel L to his leg while pulling a wounded private to safety during an ambush. Honorably discharged with full honors. A hero, a real hero. Not just in one moment in an alley, but over and over again in deserts halfway around the world in situations most people couldn't even imagine. Sarah Chen found more. She found the divorce papers, found the PTSD diagnosis, found the spiral that had taken a decorated war veteran and left him homeless on the streets. She found the truth that Marcus never shared, never wanted sympathy for, never used as an excuse. He'd lost everything. His marriage, his home, his mental health. The war had broken something inside him that couldn't be fixed by medals or commendations or parades. And instead of getting help, instead of finding support, he'd fallen through the cracks. Became invisible, became one of the thousands of veterans living on the streets, forgotten by the country they'd served. And now he'd sacrificed again, for a stranger, for a girl he didn't know. Risked his life, risked his freedom, asked for nothing in return. Not a criminal, A hero who'd already given everything for his country, and now he'd given again. Sarah Chen published her article at noon. The headline read, "Homeless Hero is Decorated War Veteran Falsely Accused by Billionaire." It was shared 1,000,000 times in the first hour. The city erupted, not just with sympathy, with rage, pure righteous rage at the injustice of it all, at the way Marcus had been treated, at the assumptions made about him, at Richard Whitmore's attempt to destroy a man who'd saved his daughter's life. Protests formed outside Whitmore's office buildings. People held signs, "Honor our veterans, dignity not dollars, Marcus Thompson is a hero." The story was on every news channel, every radio station, every website. It wasn't just a local story anymore, it was national, international. Marcus Thompson's face was everywhere, his story was everywhere, and people were demanding answers, demanding accountability, demanding that Richard Whitmore face the consequences of his prejudice, his assumptions, his cruelty. The city demanded justice, and Richard Whitmore had nowhere left to hide. In his mansion, surrounded by lawyers and publicists and security, Richard Whitmore realized something for the first time in his life. His money couldn't fix this. His power couldn't stop this. His control had slipped through his fingers like water, and there was nothing he could do to get it back. He tried to make Marcus Thompson disappear. Instead, he'd made him impossible to ignore. He'd tried to bury the truth. Instead, he'd made it shine brighter than ever. He'd tried to protect his family by destroying a man he saw as a threat, and in doing so, he'd become the villain in a story that the whole world was watching. Emma stood in her room, watching the news coverage on her laptop, watching her father's empire crack, watching the truth spread like light breaking through darkness. She thought about Marcus, about his quiet dignity, about the way he'd walked away from her in that alley asking for nothing, about the way he'd sat in that interrogation room accepting his fate without complaint, about the way he'd packed his bags to disappear rather than fight back. And she realized something. Marcus Thompson had never needed the world to know his story. He'd been content to be invisible, to survive, to exist in the margins. But the world needed to know. The world needed to see. The world needed to understand that heroes don't always wear expensive suits, that dignity doesn't come from a bank account, that the most valuable people are often the ones society ignores. Marcus Thompson had saved her life, and now maybe she'd saved his by telling the truth, by refusing to be silent, by shining a light in the darkness, and nothing would ever be the same again. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. Richard Whitmore stood at his office window on the 42nd floor, looking down at the street below. From up here, the protesters looked like ants, small, insignificant, easy to ignore, but he could still hear them. Even through the triple-pane glass and the hum of the air conditioning, he could hear their chants. "Justice for Marcus! Justice for Marcus!" The sound drilled into his skull like a jackhammer, relentless, unstoppable, a reminder that his carefully constructed world was falling apart. His office was enormous, mahogany desk, leather chairs, original artwork on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the entire city. This room was designed to make him feel powerful, untouchable, like a god looking down on his kingdom. But today, it felt like a prison. Behind him, his board of directors sat around the conference table in emergency session. 12 men and women in expensive suits, their faces tight with concern. They'd been talking for 2 hours, about damage control, about public statements, about whether Richard should step down as CEO until the scandal blew over. His reputation was crumbling. Stock prices were dropping. Major clients were pulling contracts. Sponsors were distancing themselves from his name. The Whitmore brand, built over 40 years, was being destroyed in a matter of days. All because of one homeless man. One act of heroism. One video that exposed the truth. Richard's hands were clenched behind his back. His jaw ached from gritting his teeth. He wanted to scream, wanted to punch something, wanted to make this all go away, but he couldn't. For the first time in his life, his money and power were useless. A soft knock at the door interrupted the board meeting. His assistant, Margaret, poked her head in. She was pale, nervous. She'd worked for Richard for 15 years and had never looked this uncomfortable. "Sir," she said quietly, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Marcus Thompson is here." The room went silent. Every head turned. Richard spun around from the window. "What?" "Marcus Thompson," Margaret repeated. "He's in the lobby. He says your daughter asked him to come. He's requesting to speak with you." Richard felt his heart pound in his chest. Marcus Thompson, here, in his building, the man he'd tried to destroy, the man whose face was now on every screen in the country, the man the whole world saw as a hero while they saw Richard as a villain. "Sir?" Margaret waited for instructions. Richard's mind raced. He could have security escort Marcus out, could refuse to see him, could hide behind his lawyers and his power and never face the man whose life he'd tried to ruin. But the board was watching. The world was watching. And somewhere in this building his daughter was watching too. Emma hadn't spoken to him in 3 days, hadn't come home, was staying with her mother, his ex-wife, in her downtown apartment. Every time Richard tried to call, Emma sent him to voicemail. Every text went unanswered. His own daughter had shut him out completely, and he knew why. Because of how he'd treated Marcus. Because of what he'd tried to do. "Send him up," Richard said. His voice sounded hollow. The board members exchanged glances. One of them, Patricia Chen, the CFO, stood up. "Richard, I don't think that's wise. Legally speaking, you shouldn't be having any contact with—" "I said send him up." Richard's voice was sharp now. "Final. The rest of you can leave. This meeting is over." They filed out slowly, casting worried looks back at him. But they left, because at the end of the day, Richard still owned 51% of this company. He still had control. At least here, at least for now. Richard walked back to his desk, sat down, tried to compose himself, tried to figure out what to say, but his mind was blank, empty. 5 minutes later, the elevator doors opened. Marcus Thompson stepped into the office. Richard barely recognized him. The last time he'd seen Marcus, he'd been sitting in that interrogation room, dirty, unshaven, hollow-eyed, looking every bit the homeless man Richard had assumed him to be. But now Marcus looked different. He was wearing clean clothes. Jeans and a button-down shirt, simple but neat. Donated by supporters, Richard guessed. His face was shaved, his hair was trimmed, his shoulders were back, his head high. He walked with the posture of a soldier, confident, dignified, strong. This wasn't a broken man. This wasn't a victim. This was someone who'd found his power again, not through money or influence, but through something deeper, something Richard didn't understand. Marcus stopped in the center of the office. He didn't sit, didn't ask permission. Just stood there looking at Richard with calm, steady eyes. "I didn't come for your money," Marcus said quietly, "or your apology. I came because your daughter asked me to." Richard felt something twist in his chest. Emma. Of course, she'd arranged this. His daughter, the one person whose opinion still mattered, had brought this man here. Richard's jaw clenched. His pride, his ego, everything in him wanted to lash out, to defend himself, to explain that he'd only been trying to protect his family, but the words stuck in his throat. "You want me to grovel?" Richard finally said. His voice was cold, defensive. "Fine. Thank you for saving Emma. I was wrong. There. Is that what you came for?" Marcus didn't react, didn't smile, didn't show any satisfaction. He just stood there, looking at Richard with an expression that was almost sad, like he was seeing something Richard couldn't see. "You weren't wrong," Marcus said. "You were afraid." Richard blinked. "Afraid? I'm not afraid of—" "Yes, you are." Marcus took a step closer. "You saw a black homeless man and made assumptions because it was easier than seeing a human being, easier than asking questions, easier than acknowledging that your worldview might be incomplete." Richard's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "I was protecting my daughter." "No." Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. "You were protecting your control. You have wealth, power, everything most people dream about, but you're terrified of losing it, terrified that the world doesn't work the way you think it does, terrified that you're not as safe as your money makes you feel. That's ridiculous. So you hurt people to keep that control." Marcus continued as if Richard hadn't spoken. "You tried to destroy me because I didn't fit into your neat little world, because I challenged your assumptions, because seeing me as a hero meant admitting you were wrong, and you couldn't do that. Your ego wouldn't let you." Silence filled the office. Heavy, suffocating. Richard wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself, but every word Marcus said hit like a hammer on glass, cracking the armor Richard had built around himself for decades. "I spent 15 months on the streets," Marcus said. His voice was quiet now, reflective, Lost everything. My marriage, my home, my career, my identity. The war took pieces of my mind I'll never get back. PTSD, nightmares, flashbacks. I fell through every crack in the system, became invisible, became nothing. He paused, looked directly into Richard's eyes. But I never lost myself. I never lost my dignity. I never lost my ability to see other people as human beings, to help when I could, to stand up when I needed to. Even with nothing, I had that. Marcus gestured round the office, at the expensive furniture, the artwork, the view. You have everything, he said. Everything money can buy. Everything power can give. But you've lost what matters most. Richard's voice cracked when he spoke. He hated how weak he sounded. How small. What's that? The ability to see people, Marcus said simply. You look at the world and you see transactions, threats, assets. You see categories and labels and assumptions, but you don't see people. You don't see the humanity in someone who doesn't look like you, who doesn't live like you, who doesn't have what you have. Richard felt something break inside his chest. Something he'd been holding onto for so long he'd forgotten it was there. Pride, certainty, the belief that his way of seeing the world was the right way. The only way. Richard started to speak, but his voice failed him. For the first time in 40 years, Richard Whitmore didn't know what to say. The door opened. Both men turned. Emma stood in the doorway. She looked at her father, then at Marcus, then back to her father. Her eyes were red from crying, but her expression was determined. Strong. Dad, she said, I'm going to keep working with Marcus. He's starting a veteran outreach program for homeless vets, for people who've fallen through the cracks, for people the system forgot. She stepped into the room, and I'm funding it, with my trust fund, with every penny I have access to. Richard stared at his daughter, his little girl, who wasn't so little anymore, who'd grown into someone with her own values, her own courage, her own sense of right and wrong that had nothing to do with what he'd taught her. He looked at Marcus, at this man he'd tried to destroy, this decorated war veteran who'd saved his daughter's life and asked for nothing in return, this man who'd been invisible until the world forced Richard to see him, and Richard realized something that made his throat tight and his eyes burn. He'd been wrong, not just about Marcus, about everything, about how the world worked, about what mattered, about what made someone valuable. Slowly, Richard stood up from his desk. His legs felt weak, his hands trembled, but he walked around the desk until he was standing in front of Marcus. I'll match your funding, he said. His voice was rough, broken. Whatever Emma gives, I'll match it. Double it. Emma's eyes widened. Dad, triple it, Richard continued. I'll use my foundation, my resources, my connections. I'll help you build this program. Make it real. Make it big enough to actually help people. Marcus studied him, searching his face for sincerity. For truth. Why? Marcus asked. Richard took a shaky breath. Because you're right. I've been blind. And I don't want to be blind anymore. He extended his hand. A simple gesture. But it meant everything. It meant acknowledgement, respect, an admission that Marcus Thompson was not a threat or a problem or a label, but a man, a hero, a human being. A G worthy of dignity. Marcus looked at the outstretched hand. For a moment he didn't move. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. Their hands clasped, firm, equal. Two men from different worlds, different lives, different circumstances. But in that moment, just men, just human beings trying to do better. Emma walked over and put her arms around both of them. Tears streamed down her face, not tears of sadness, tears of hope, of possibility, of change. Richard Whitmore had spent his entire life building an empire, accumulating wealth, gathering power, controlling everything around him. He'd measured his worth by his bank account, his properties, his influence. But standing there in his expensive office, holding the hand of a homeless veteran he'd tried to destroy, Richard realized something that money could never teach. That dignity isn't something you buy, it's something you carry. That respect isn't given based on wealth. It's earned through character. That the most valuable things in life, the things that truly matter, can't be owned or controlled or purchased. They can only be given, freely, from one human being to another. Marcus Thompson had given Richard's daughter her life. And now, in a different way, he'd given Richard something too. A chance to see, a chance to change, a chance to be more than the sum of his bank accounts, a chance to be human. And sometimes that's the most valuable gift of all.